Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Inside Marketing. We are in the midst of a very, very sunny and warm day in the middle of the UK heat wave right now. But we're inside recording a podcast, which is exactly where we want to be. And today I'm joined by Ben Bowden, who is the head of marketing at Seed Architects. Really, really excited to have you join us, Ben. So thank you very much for taking the time on this warm day, although I understand you're in an air-conditioned meeting room, so not too bad.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. And Ben and I've met prior, and I think some of the things that we're going to be able to talk about today are yeah, really, really interesting. And I'm really keen to kind of get into your experience and your journey so far and learn more about that. So yeah, really excited to get into it. I suppose, Ben, the best place to start for things like this is perhaps if you can give us a bit of an intro into you, your role, your journey with marketing so far, perhaps a bit about the organization you work for, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. I'm head of marketing at Seed Architects.
Hmm.
Been in the role for about 12 months now, just over 12 months. Um, my background before that is I ran a creative agency that I set up when I was 21.
Okay.
I ran that for 3.5 years. Um, Never really had any sort of jobs before that apart from a 2 week placement
Hmm.
doing websites and apps for professional and amateur sports teams.
Yeah.
Um, Sort of through doing my own business and things like that, I then got into sort of doing public speaking about marketing and sort of bringing young people into the industry. Um, Seed approached me, as I say, just probably about 15 months ago now. And they'd grown quite rapidly over a short space of time. The
Okay.
company's been going for around 11 years, but um, they wanted to build an in-house team of marketers,
Mm.
and they wanted me to be the guy they could bring in and sort of eventually build a team around, I guess. So I've come in with very little marketing done previously, and it's just trying
Yep.
to just bring in sort of processes and change the way that I think it's thought about. Because as I say, we're an architect, so we work predominantly in the rail industry. So there's a lot
Okay.
of sort of station upgrades and upgrading sort of existing buildings within sort of railway stations.
Mm.
Then the other side of what we do is more commercial, so it's things like wedding halls, it might be hospitality venues, things like that, and a bit of sort of residential as well, so like flats and things like that. So
Mm.
um, the main sort of challenge with it is, I think, construction as an industry is an industry that maybe quite neglects marketing as such, and I think it's because
Yeah.
of the quite polar opposites in terms of one's very sort of hands-on, rough and tumble
Yeah.
outside sort of task, and one is sort of online, if you like. So it's trying to maybe convert maybe old school previous thinking and trying to sort of push what we can do within the industry and actually make an
Sure.
impact with it.
Yeah, sure. That's so interesting, and I think that's often the challenge, isn't it? You kind of get brought in, and there's not very much, and you really have to build it from the ground up. I wonder if you could kind of paint us a picture of what that first 12 months has looked like. Like, how have you tackled that challenge? What have you prioritized? What progress have you made? And how's that been? If you could shine a light on that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what I was doing initially was trying to actually make it so that obviously you'll know yourself, everything's sort of interlinked. So there's
Yeah.
no point. We were doing some things, but not other things. So like, for example, the main priority when I joined was that they wanted to get me out to networking, but I was sort of saying there's no point going out to networking if someone then comes and they go on our social media or they go onto the
Yeah.
website and it's not in a good enough position to show off what we do to a good ability. Um, so for me, it was really about sort of streamlining what we already had in place and trying to improve that a little bit,
Yeah.
to really make it so that the work that we're doing sort of interlinks and has a chance of converting work. Because
Mm.
there's no point in putting a lot of effort into doing all this stuff if it's one part of it's going to let you down. Because I think that
Yeah.
you could have a really good website but if you're not managing to get people onto there, it's quite
Sure.
useless essentially. So yeah, I've sort of improved the website, got us posting quite regularly, and mainly on LinkedIn, just because I feel like that is sort of the sort of bodies of people who we focus on are
Mm,
more LinkedIn based.
mm,
And then we've done a little bit on sort of SEO and just trying to streamline the brand. Really, I think a lot of the stuff that we were
sure.
putting out was maybe a bit inconsistent, and it's for me it's really been about trying to make sure that everyone within the company understands the sort of value of making things consistent and the impression that we can give off to people.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And again, in a traditional industry, it's only natural that the kind of first instinct is networking. It's very sort of like traditional face to face, more lead generation really than looking at marketing, but it kind of tends to fall into that bracket, doesn't it? But I think you're so right. It's um, getting the house that we're going to welcome people into, if we're going to invite people there, to be pristine, to reflect us how we want to be reflected, and not just to look and feel great, but for the user journey there to make sense to them, to give them the information that they need and to answer their questions. And so often that's super confused, and people are focusing on that very bottom of the funnel activity. But where are we sending them? Are we even ready to receive those people? Maybe we should actually delay that and get everything sorted first. It sounded like you had to do quite a lot of foundational work there, but it's important and it takes time. It's not something that can just be sort of done overnight. You know, those projects you're talking about there are huge, website and branding and consistency on social media. That stuff takes a long time on the treadmill to get up and running properly. I wonder how you maintain all of that. It's you doing kind of everything, right? So that's a lot, and I wonder how you prioritize that
Yeah,
to make sure everything keeps running.
yeah, it is a lot to be honest, and it's just become a lot more because we've launched sort of a partner company, which I'm head of marketing for
Okay.
that as well.
Okay.
But it, to be honest, I think the initial thing was because, particularly with sort of the directors here and things, they'd worked previously with some sort of marketing agency, and they felt that because it's quite an intricate sort of industry, they felt that they weren't really understood in terms of what they were putting out, and that's why
Sure.
they wanted the person in house. So initially, it was very much about me sort of building the trust and showing that we can actually make improvements. And I feel like once they saw our improvements, they were then more willing to sort of experiment with things.
Sure.
So for me, I always thought that because marketing is essentially it's loads of different jobs within a thing, and my
Yeah.
background's
All the
graphic
hats.
design. Yeah, my background's graphic design, so I'm going to be stronger at some things like the branding, for example. I'm going to be a lot stronger at some of the more visual stuff as opposed to a lot more of the sort of strategy behind it, the web design,
Yeah.
SEO, things like that. Um, I think that we're getting to a point now where that trust is there and sort of understanding the value of it. So we are starting to outsource a bit more stuff that we're doing,
Yeah.
which I think allows us to then go to that next level because I think there's a lot of businesses at the moment where they bring people in and they expect someone in marketing to be able to do everything, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people you can to an extent, but I think your ceiling's very limited on how far you can actually go with that. So like, for
Yeah.
example, as I was saying before, I feel like we've made quite a bit of improvement in terms of since I've come in. But if it was just me purely doing it
Yeah.
forever, it there would be a ceiling on how far that could go.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we've sort of got to a point now where we are sort of starting to bring in sort of specialists for things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's so, I mean, that this is the sort of thing that I speak about all the time. And I think the role of a marketing professional in-house in a business has just grown to be so ginormous. That, you know, an in-house person back in the day, the realm of marketing was pretty small, pretty finite, and it was kind of possible for one person to have the skill set required to do all of that stuff. But nowadays, I mean, like you've just mentioned, you need to be a PPC expert, an SEO expert, a web design expert, a graphic designer, social media coordinator, and all of those things are in-depth expertise in their own rights. And so, what I think, in my experience, tends to happen is we either neglect really critical areas because we simply just don't have the time or expertise, or the opposite end of the spectrum is we kind of try and really thinly spread, have a go at everything, but we either are a bit out of our depth because we're not actually experts in that area, so we're trying to, work it out and do it on the go, or we kind of know what we're doing, but we simply just don't have the time, so everything gets nudged along a tiny bit, and there's no progress. And I think also the other problem with that is you're there in a kind of strategic capacity. But then if you're having to come up with strategy and then almost go behind the curtain and execute all the strategy, the momentum is so much slower. So yeah, good that you're able to get the help now. And do you find that helps you to kind of maintain that zoom out strategic perspective so that you can still lead the strategy? Because I guess that's important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's probably the main difference I noticed in terms of obviously working for myself before. You are very
Mm,
much getting that outsider perspective, whereas when you're in the office every single day and you are working on the same business every day,
yeah.
it can be quite hard to take that step back and then assess what you're doing because
Mm,
you're working on something every single day for, well, as I say, what we've been doing at the moment, we've been working on it essentially for 12 months.
yeah.
And to get part way through that, you can get very caught up in that process and not be aware of maybe there might be a shortcoming there or I might not
Yeah.
be doing this
Yeah.
in the correct way. We should change direction with that. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that is one benefit in terms of me coming from that sort of freelance agency sort of background is that I
Yeah.
sort of have a few sort of people who I can bounce ideas off and sort of go to for
Sure.
advice because I think that can be very difficult working on your own to just have someone to bounce ideas off, particularly in sort of an office where the other guys obviously I can bounce ideas off them, but no one else is in marketing essentially. So
Yeah, sure.
it's good to be able to have those people and have those contacts where you can sort of just ask for advice, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I guess that's probably quite a common thing that people who go on a similar journey to you, and there's probably lots of people who have come from that more agency side and now sit in house, and probably quite a strange feeling, really, because back in the day, the office would be filled with people with similar brains, coming up with similar ideas. All the noise that you'd hear around you would be marketing ideas, marketing strategy, and then to go somewhere where actually you're the one that's driving, coming up with the ideas, and everybody else will obviously look at it in the business, other stakeholders, other directors will look at it through a different lens, won't they? And then you've got to kind of be the point in the middle that manages, okay, that's coming from a more commercial perspective, or that's leaning mostly on kind of that product or service, but actually I want to be more holistic. So yeah, it probably does feel quite difficult initially because you are used to being among others and then by yourself. But it's good that you have that existing network that you can kind of go through ideas with. And if you're outsourcing, obviously you're kind of growing that team to have more of a group of you, so it's like a collective think whenever you're trying to come up with something. But I think that's a challenge that's not often spoken about, and a lot of companies still just have one marketing manager, and there's a lot on their shoulders then, isn't there? So it's tough. I wonder if, like, you mentioned that kind of your experience, and we're kind of talking here about skills that marketers need and things like that. You mentioned you've done quite a bit on speaking to young people getting into marketing and building their career. I guess it would be good to get your insight really and what you think that looks now. Maybe we have younger listeners, or maybe we have more marketing leads listening and looking to grow their own teams. What do you think that like junior marketing professionals need to have and need to bring to the industry nowadays? What kind of attitudes and behaviors and skills to succeed? What's your view?
I think, to be honest, my sort of perspective, my personal experience on it was that I never really, obviously slightly different now because there's a lot of people who are social media influencers and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
and it is seen as sort of a job when you're younger. Whereas when I was younger, I think I sort of looked at it as in a very naive way, but obviously I was young. Of oh, it's just like a flyer, it's just a poster, it's a booklet. I
Yeah.
never really saw that as a career path. And for me, it was only when I had this teacher who he taught graphics, but he also did like an after school graphics lesson, like a club sort of thing. And that's only when I sort of understood that it was more of a career. Um,
Mm,
and I feel like now that's changed slightly, as I say, because I think a lot of people do understand marketing, but they maybe don't understand it to sort of the more strategical side behind it. They just see the sort of
mm,
glory side of you post a TikTok video, you've got millions of
yeah.
likes and things like that. Um, I think my advice would be though that it is more, it's easier to get into than ever. I think in terms of doing your own stuff in the background. Um,
Mm,
if you can grow a TikTok account, you can grow a YouTube account. Just using your passion. If you find something that you're passionate about, there's a community for everything.
yeah.
I think if you're actually really passionate about something and you put that into a video, there's going to be a following for it. Eventually, you just need to stick at it. And I think it's a very good place to experiment as well, and there's no pressure, particularly if it's more of a passion project, because you can let things go wrong. You can try something out, and if it don't work, it's fine. It's a bit
Yeah.
obviously demoralising if it doesn't work out, but I think that if you then go into like a job interview or you're applying for jobs or something like that, and you can show, look, I've spent sort of the last 2 3 years, let's say, and I've just been using my own initiative. I've been going away and I've been trying to grow something. I've been trying to build something. In certain respects, it might not even matter as much if you've got sort of academic qualifications, if you're actually doing something practical and can show some sort of
Yeah.
proof that you can do something. So I
Yeah.
do very much think that marketing and sort of creative industries as such um, are swaying less towards the academic route in some senses, because I think once you build up that portfolio and you start to have a proven track record of results and things like
Mm.
that, sort of what you have academically starts to matter an awful lot less, because the proof is that you can do your job. Um,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think that ability to identify an opportunity is really key. And you can show that in many, many different ways. It's that ability to understand a channel or an audience so well that you can say, no, yeah, with confidence, I think that this is a good idea, and then your idea follows through with results. I think that's the key, isn't it? Um, so yeah, I think that's nice for young people, or maybe anybody who's listening that wants to get into marketing, that actually it's more those core competencies of being able to be dedicated towards something and be consistent with something and have drive to push something to completion, which actually has no real bearing on academics or anything that you say. So I think that's, yeah, important message to hear when you're starting out. I'd be interested to know, you mentioned there that a lot of young people now don't really know what marketing is. And I think that's totally understandable. How would you define it? How would you if someone asked you, if someone's looking to get into the career, how would you describe marketing? Because that is such a challenge to even summarize it, isn't it? I mean, what is it that we
yeah.
do?
Yeah, I think if you're going to put it in a very sort of simple way of putting it, I think you are just essentially finding the best, the most effective methods of promoting either a product or service to people,
Hmm.
with obviously the end goal of selling your product or service.
Mm, mm,
I think something which maybe is misinterpreted a lot of the time is that there's certain best methods to do things, and I think that
mm.
each case or each industry or even each business is very individual, and I think should be taken on sort of a case by case basis. So I wouldn't want to narrow it down any more than that, just because I feel like marketing as a whole is so broad.
Mm, mm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's right, isn't it? I think there's a lot in there about psychology, about understanding people, about understanding the brain in order to be able to, yeah, promote, encourage, persuade an audience towards making a certain decision. Um, it's really hard to define. I think that kind of comes back to our earlier point, where almost marketing is too much of a broad topic now to just have one sole definition. It's content marketing, it's social media marketing, it's email marketing, it's graphic design. Like all of those things are disciplines in themselves. All of those things have a definition, and together they group together to form marketing. But it's really hard now that it's so large to umbrella topic it, isn't it? So, and that's a
Yeah.
challenge. And then that speaks to why it's so difficult for one person to do all of those things. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think something that you touched on there as well, that not a lot of people really associate with it, is the psychology aspect of it.
Mm,
I think that obviously it's very easy to see sort of the visual output that marketing has, but I think um, in terms of from my background, obviously in my previous role, I was sort of having to sell my own service, which I think comes in handy quite a lot with the marketing side of things because I sort of studied quite a lot into sort of the psychology behind social selling and sort of what
sure.
shapes people's approaches to how they discuss sort of things like money, how they part
Mm,
with money, and things like that. And I think that can be really useful in terms of understanding your audience and understanding what sort of trigger points, what actually motivates people to spend money, what motivates people to make that decision. Because it is quite it's quite a difficult thing to understand. I mean, obviously, one of the most complex things in the world is understanding people. So it's
yeah.
it is very you can get very in depth in terms of the psychology side of things, motivating what you
Mm.
do.
Yeah, I find that whole side of it really interesting. I mean, I always think of it in the sense that, people make all their purchasing decisions for emotional reasons. So they buy either for pain or for fear, for pleasure, which is obviously, real bedrock of marketing and a place where lots of strategies will start. And I think if you can identify that, then building a strategy from that emotion is key. I think so often people and marketing strategies can center too much away from the psychology, more about us and what we do and what our features and benefits are and projects we've done. But actually, if it's not having any emotional resonance with the problems that our prospects are facing, we're unlikely to get any engagement there. So I think the psychology aspect is important, and like you say, often kind of deprioritized and lost in the noise. And people forget that actually, whether we're B2B or B2C, we are ultimately just trying to make a connection person to person. Me as a person, as a marketer, sat behind the screen trying to create something that's going to captivate somebody, speaking to what is essentially a person. We speak about it like we're speaking to a business, but ultimately we're not. We're speaking to a person within a business. So, what can we do to create that connection? So it's important, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but difficult, like you say, very, very complex. None of us have any, not even maybe a 1% understanding of how complex that is. But I think just acknowledging it as a start
Yeah,
is
definitely.
important.
I think it can sometimes be overcomplicated. As I say, a lot of people believe that there is certain methods to do certain things, and it has to be done in a certain structure and things like that. But I think a
Mm,
lot of the time you don't know unless you experiment, and I think a lot of people are very worried about getting things wrong. But I
yeah,
think I personally just think that's part of the process. Like I think that you've got to try something out, and it might go wrong, and then you just know not to do it again, or you know not to do it for
yeah,
a while. You might try it again further down the line, but
yeah,
I think that is something that not a lot of people talk about. Is that it's so easy for a business to play it safe and just copy what everyone else is doing, but then it sort of almost defeats the point of doing marketing
yeah,
because you're doing your marketing to stand out, and if you're not standing out, you're just doing what everyone else is doing, then
yeah, yeah,
defeats the point.
yeah. I think that's such a nice way to look at it, and I think you're so right. There's such a fear culture around getting things wrong, but the compound success that comes from that failure, if we call it a failure, from a campaign going wrong, we learn so much that then goes on to make the next campaigns better. So, would you rather have something that's copycat and kind of trundling along, but not really generating any sort of genuine impact? Or would you rather be experimental and brave? And this topic of brave keeps coming up in our podcast because that's really what it seems to boil down to, just having this bravery to stand out and just go all in on an idea, even if that idea might end up in a failure. Well, guess what? It might not. And also, even if it does fail, we're doing it in a controlled way whereby if it doesn't do well, we're tracking it, we're going to understand why. That's going to give us better insight into our audience. So yeah, I think an openness to experiment, and any marketers who find themselves in a position and in a culture and in an organization that's open to experimentation, I think that's a really fortunate position to be in, because it's that space to be able to try things, which is essential, right? If we don't try, we don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
yeah,
think it's also very prominent at the moment, the whole thing around sort of personal branding and things like that.
yeah,
And that sort of reiterates that point in terms of that works because of personality. And
yeah,
if you're not showing that personality, it's not going to work.
yeah,
Because people resonate with what they see in themselves, essentially. So people obviously only care about what you can give to them. They don't really care about like what you've done, your achievements, things
no,
like that. Obviously, it reiterates the trust that they have in you if you've won certain awards and things like that. But the main thing they care about is what can they get from either
yeah,
working with you, from your products, things like that. What are the benefits to them? Um, I think personality as well just shows that if you're going to work with someone, you want to get on with them. Like
yeah,
you want someone who's going to be personable, and you want someone who you think, right, if I have a problem with this service, I can reach out to them. They're going to be okay.
yeah,
You know,
they'll help me.
if it's especially if it's an ongoing relationship, you want someone who
Mm.
you can actually build that relationship with.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to see the science on that. I'd love to be able to somehow analyze what goes on in someone's brain when making a decision, and how much of that is relationship based and how much of that is social proof based, and how much, because I think the relationship part, I really agree with you that really has such a weight. And it comes down to that feeling of trust between one party and another party, and the other things play into it, but in terms of creating that connection to an extent that somebody's going to feel that they're going to purchase with you, they're going to make that purchasing decision, I think that's hugely relationship based. And it's how the challenge then, and we all know this, is how do we then convey that in B2B marketing? How do we put that personality across when traditional views will tell us that there's no place for that, and actually it's got to be corporate and professional and informational and educational and all those traditional words. It needs to be, actually, like, that needs to be shaken up. And I imagine that's kind of part of what you were talking about at the beginning, where you really have revitalized the view of what marketing should be in the construction industry, which is a challenge, but by all accounts, it looks like you're making great progress with that. So congrats on that, because I know that's not the easiest thing to
Yeah,
do.
I think it's.
I work.
I
Sorry,
think
go
it's.
ahead. Yeah.
I think it's sort of. It can be a challenge in terms of changing perspectives, as you say.
Mm,
I think that something which I tend to find is that, as you say, at the end of the day, whether you're going for like an MD of a huge company or something, they've
mm,
still all got interests, they've still all got passions, they've still all got things like that. And what we tend to find is, like, for example, we sponsor a local rugby team, a rugby league team, who are a decent level, a championship team. But some of the posts that we do about that and like going down to the games, like engaging with them and things like that, generates so much conversation with other business owners, because there's so many fans
yeah.
of just like rugby league and things like that, as particularly in the north. Um, so I think that it doesn't always have to be such business focused things, because people have lives away from that. You tend to find
Yeah.
when you have like an introductory meeting with someone or things like that. I always think that the first half of any sort of introductory meeting or anything like that should always be sort of actually getting to know people and understanding a bit more
Yeah.
about them. Um, just because it's just you find things in common, and it often breaks down the sort of the barrier. There's so many times you have a meeting where you'll turn up and the person will have sort of corporate face on, and they'll be very stern and
Yeah.
sort of But if you find a topic that they're passionate about, that suddenly breaks down and it's just a
Yeah.
lot more relaxed and sociable.
Yeah, I agree. And that I think marketing fits in there in the way that we've completely moved away from this really on the nose promotional content all the time. I mean, consumers are just far too shrewd for that now. They crave authenticity. They can see exactly when they're just being sold to and when it's not something that's welcome or that they need or that fits in with what their requirements are. So we can't market like that anymore. We have to be far more relationship based and um, fit in around the other content that they're consuming. We've got to feel like we're not there with a hidden agenda. We're genuinely just providing potentially a solution. But there's also loads of other things about us. And I think what you mentioned there about localization and kind of being in the north and the credibility that's then built with prospects through just seeing that you guys are in the same sort of region as them, and that makes them feel kind of comfortable and that you're approachable. And I think that's really interesting psychology as well. So yeah, really interesting and so many things for people to consider. I wonder kind of if there's been anything in the first 12 months that you've really adopted either as like a new channel for the business or a new mindset or just like a new piece in your strategy that's, I don't know, maybe you thought it might have been a bit of a risk but it has really started to pay off, or you're thinking it's going to. Have there been any kind of big wins that you would shout about from the last 12 months?
I think, to be honest, it'd mainly be, well, there'd be two things, to be honest. We started doing a lot more sort of story driven content. So I was very sort of insistent when I first joined that obviously what we're doing is we're building buildings. So
Yeah.
a lot of the time it can either be nothing's on the site and you're building a completely new building on a space, or it could be there's an existing building and it's got a lot of history behind it, and then you
Mm.
convert it into something else. I think that the story driven things, people really buy into that. So if you're sort of following the sort of traditional story structure of sort of what is the problem, why do
Yeah.
they bring you in, how do we then go about solving that problem, and then we look at sort of the repercussions of that. So a lot of the time, particularly with rail stuff, I can back that up with sort of like footfall in the station, or it could be,
Yeah.
the feedback or things like that. And I think that shows a sort of case study where people can put themselves in the shoes of the person who's buying, particularly sort of your target market and things like that. They can put themselves in the shoes of that person and relate it to their own problems. So that would be one thing I'd say. And then the other thing I'd say would just be more, it's sort of marketing related. It'd just be sort of being more open to conversations with just a wider range of businesses. So I think that we were very sort of not closed off, but we were very. We'll speak to people if they have an immediate sort of. There's that insinuation that they can give us something, and I
Yeah.
think that I tried to change that quite a lot in terms of there is a lot of people who we speak to now who maybe aren't in industries that you'd immediately associate with us, but they
Yeah,
may be
that's interesting.
into other industries. I
Mm.
think it's not about who the person who you're going to meet knows. It might be about who the person they know, or whether they know someone who works in your industry,
Yeah.
might have more contacts and things like that. So that's a kind of marketing related one, kind of not, but it's.
No, I don't think.
I think it also helps tailor our audience a little bit and suggest that if we are doing stuff that's being
Yeah.
seen by a wider amount of people, um, it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's um, just such a it's such a simple thing, isn't it? But I reckon there's so much missed opportunity from at the very top of the funnel, people basing who they want to target off who they've targeted previously or who have been previous customers, and that's such an open goal because just because that's been our customer base up until that point doesn't necessarily that reflects who might be interested in us now in 2024, and having too much of a fixed mindset towards that can be like really damaging. And I think that's where it comes back to our conversation of testing and learning and being curious. Why not? Why would this industry not be interested in us? Let's see if that opens anything up, and then that can give us insight into what other markets might be interesting. But yeah, I see a lot of it, businesses just that we might ask them, okay, so who's your target customer? And then they say who their target customer is, but that's only because that's who they've worked with so far and doesn't take into account who else might be interested. But I do appreciate that it's hard for businesses to work out who else might we resonate with. And our answer of that, of course, to that is, well, you got to test and see. And that's where the cycle is difficult, isn't it? Because testing and seeing is risky and sticking with what we know is safe. So we'll just keep doing that. But then we never make new ground. So it's tough, very tough. But sounds like
Yeah.
you're, is that worked for you then? So you've kind of developed, almost opened up new markets or understood other industries that you might be able to target in future through that approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think the sort of bonus of my role is that because it was a role created for me, I got to sort of morph it into what I'd like it to be. So I do quite a bit of sort of business development as well.
Yeah.
So in that perspective, I get the opportunity to bring in and experiment with these sort of other people who I'm meeting at sort of
Yeah.
networking events and things like that, which can be really interesting to sort of get out and about and actually hear feedback on some of the stuff we're doing and
Yeah.
start talking to people and just using them as almost opportunities to learn and understand industries a little bit better as well.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think that is particularly obviously with my background not being in architecture, I think that was something that was kind of quite important for me was understanding how other businesses within construction link into what we can do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think the business development and marketing alignment is really important. That's something that is kind of always talked about as a real success within a business if sales and marketing can work together. So if you're almost between the two, I can see why that's really beneficial because you get the down on the street kind of you get to hear what people are actually talking about, what actually people are struggling with, then you get to go back to the marketing desk, put the marketing hat on, and solve those problems in how you're speaking about the brand. So I think that's really important. I think any organisation that doesn't have a good line of communication, kind of both ways between sales and marketing, that's something really to address because there's so much insight that can just be gathered from what a prospect's saying on calls, what a prospect's saying at the event shows that you're going to, and if you're not discussing that, it's missed opportunity.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I think
so
that
yeah,
has sort of been my main push in terms of the next step of alignment that I want to go down is more. Obviously, I bring the people in, but then the actual sort of sealing of the deal, if you will,
yeah,
um, that's sort of done by other people. So I feel like that is the next step of alignment for me. Is I've come in and applied all this stuff using sort of even knowledge that I've got or information that we have from previous sort of
mm,
people. But now that we've actually put all this stuff into practice, all this new sort of forms of marketing, that's going to be sort of my next stage is trying to find out of sort of the people who speak to clients regularly, how has
mm,
that sort of changed the implication of us? How has that changed sort of, is there any trends in sort of the way in which people maybe approach us? Is there any trends in the way,
yeah,
what indicators people would use in terms of justification from using us and things like that?
yeah.
Um, and I think that'll be really interesting to sort of find out and see whether what we've been doing is actually working, I guess.
Yeah, moment of truth. Yeah, no, I think that sounds really good and a good kind of next stage project, and an exciting one, and great that you have the team and the ability to kind of mingle amongst the different departments and get that insight to better the marketing strategy. So it sounds like, I mean, in 12 months you've done so much, and best of luck with the continuation of that. We are actually just kind of coming to the end of the time. I mean, it's been great to hear all of the things that you've been up to, and I mean, I had lots of questions, but kind of stayed mainly on the initial topics, but that's no problem at all. I mean, I think it's really interesting what we've spoken about with regards to young people getting into marketing, psychology, marketing strategy, new markets, and just generally being open minded. So Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on today, Ben. I really enjoyed the on-brand image behind you, by the way, of the train.
Yeah,
Nice
it's
positioning.
complete coincidence. It's the shared
Shep-
meeting room, which is very
Oh,
coincidental.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
really?
it's
Well,
not even our
the
space.
bonus points for the branding message in the background there. And no, it was a delight to talk to you and really nice to meet you, Ben. So thanks for coming
Yeah,
on the
you too.
episode, and we look forward to listening back.
No worries. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Ben. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Cheers.